Since yesterday evening, or rather early evening, there has been a piece of news that is triggering very different reactions among people. The news, for example, is reported by the Financial Times, but also by the Berlin newspaper Tagesspiegel. So basically, all media outlets already reported it yesterday with the headline, more or less, that NATO seems to have reached its limit and is now discussing the shooting down of Russian aircraft. Which reaction is, of course, logical. Many are afraid and say, for God's sake, are we really on the verge of war? Others in turn say, yes, finally it's starting and we won't put up with anything anymore. In 15 days at the latest, things will really get going here. In this video, I would like to present the facts. Above all, I would like to report to you on how united the various European states are. Because that is not necessarily the case. What role does Ursula von der Leyen play once again, and what scenarios are actually possible? And with that, a warm welcome to Why Critical with Lil. Think clearly, decide for yourself. Yes, the world seems to be a bit excited, but not only here in the West, Russia also seems to be a bit very angry here. And what is currently taking place at NATO, namely consultations, is actually perceived by them as a provocation. For weeks you have known that reports have been accumulating that Russian drones have apparently flown over NATO airspace. It is reported that Russian fighter planes have also violated NATO airspace, even if it was only supposedly for a few seconds. And now people are talking, but now the tone seems to be changing, because in several NATO capitals there is discussion about whether Russian planes should be shot down in an emergency. What sounds like a taboo is long the subject of serious consultation and has been for several weeks. This must be made clear here, because behind closed doors, military and politicians are discussing new rules of engagement, i.e. new rules of engagement that determine when pilots are allowed to open fire. Some states are calling for the course to be tightened considerably, because, as it is said, Russia is testing our responsiveness, and that is happening every day. But what sounds like self-defense on paper would be a violent step. Shooting down a Russian jet would of course dramatically change the situation in Europe in any case. I would not like to gloss over that in any way here. The situation would change militarily, politically, and of course psychologically. So the impact on the population is of course self-evident, but within NATO there is anything but agreement. And that is actually a good sign at the moment, even if Ursula von der Leyen naturally wants something completely different, but I'll come to that later. So while countries like Poland, Estonia and Great Britain are relying on clear deterrence and, if necessary, on armed reaction, others are urging restraint, including France, Italy, but also Germany, because they are actually warning of a possible spiral of escalation. From Berlin, it is said in some circles, every shot could be the beginning of something that no one can control anymore. However, to be fair, there are many in the CDU, CSU who are really in favor of a tough approach. The SD and also, of course, many parts of the Green politicians, however, urge restraint. Whether that could actually change is the big question. The Bundeswehr also plays a special role, of course. But there is another video about how young men's willingness to go to war is at the moment. We want to have a look at that in the next video. While Germany, France and Italy are therefore somewhat in favor of restraint. What information is coming from Warsaw? If Russia violates our borders, we must react, otherwise we will lose all credibility. The question, of course, is whether it is about the issue of credibility or about protecting the population. I'm just asking the question like that. This means that the discussion is definitely intensifying here, and it was the case in the past that even Estonia applied for a consultation under Article 4 of NATO, a relatively rarely used instrument. I also reported on it in a video, which namely enables consultation in the event of a threat. The background to the debate is Russia's so-called hybrid warfare, a strategy of targeted provocation, disinformation and military pressure. That is what one assumes. And although one has not yet been able to clearly determine the origin of the drones in the past, one is of the opinion that one must definitely react to the drones with Bayoneten drones. There is not only this bill in Bavaria now, but also the Bundestag or the federal government is apparently working on a bill or has even already developed it. However, the Bundestag still has to discuss and vote on it. Actually, one seems to be definitely in agreement with the assertion that Russian jets repeatedly violate the airspace for a short time in order to test the reactions of NATO here. For many observers, these are no coincidences, but quite calculated pinpricks from Russia. The legal side is quite complicated. A shootdown would only be legitimate if an immediate threat actually existed. But what if a jet enters NATO territory here for a few seconds? Who decides in the heat of battle whether it was intentional or a navigation error? And such questions simply show that there is really a razor-thin line between defense and escalation. And all those politicians who are urging restraint are of course aware of this. By the way, the last time a NATO country shot down a Russian plane was in 2015. Some of you will still remember. It was Turkey. It destroyed an Su-24 over Syria at the time, and what followed was a real diplomatic crisis, a Russian embargo, and weeks of high tension. Today the effect would of course be much more far-reaching. A single shootdown could permanently tip the entire relationship between NATO and Russia. And the Kremlin is already warning, isn't it? The mere discussion about a possible shootdown saw a dangerous provocation. That is what it says here from the Kremlin. Russian media are using the topic for their propaganda as proof that NATO is preparing for a war against Russia. Is that so? Some are actually of the opinion, also in social media, that NATO is now actually preparing for a war here. I'm really not so sure about that. I don't want to unnecessarily reassure you here. Definitely not. The situation is quite explosive, let's put it that way. But absolute unity would have to be achieved between all European states here. And it doesn't actually look like that at the moment. Now, of course, some argue, yes, God forbid. Donald Trump also said, yes, if Russian planes enter NATO airspace here, then they should, of course, be shot down. He makes good speeches. In the event of a warlike escalation, he is far enough away. And what will all this mean in concrete terms for us? In the following, I would like to show you 5 possible scenarios here, and I would like to explicitly address the somewhat questionable role of Ursula von der Leyen here again. Scenario 1. A Russian jet is intercepted, warning shots are fired, and there is no destruction. This means that a narrow jet approaches, fires warning shots first, or shoots specifically into the flight path with the aim of forcing the Russian aircraft to keep its distance. This allows a kind of step-by-step control. But what if the other reacts or interprets wrongly? Scenario 2. Targeted shoot-down in case of a clear threat. Only if it is explicitly proven that the aircraft, the Russian aircraft, is attacking or actively carrying weapons, then of course a shoot-down would be possible here. Scenario 3. Armed drone along the border. These drones could of course react faster and endanger human pilots less. But technically and legally, they are not trivial and they take the debate to the next level. That has to be said quite clearly here. Scenario 4. Increased surveillance and air police, but no shoot-down. This would mean more radar, more alarm states, targeted deterrence, less provocation, and a lower risk. For many states, possibly the preferred middle ground. Scenario 5. Gradual escalation and red line. Now I would like to go into the role of Ursula von der Leyen. We read the following in the Berliner Zeitung. At the same time, the European Union is of course also working on its own measures against Russian provocations. According to Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, travel restrictions for Russian diplomats are to be tightened and EU funds are to be made available for the construction of anti-drone systems. So far, so good. This is a targeted grey area campaign against Europe and Europe must react, said von der Leyen. Russia wants to see division. We must respond with unity. And now comes the decisive sentence. Not only react, but deter. This means that Ursula von der Leyen does not only want to react in some way in these possible 5 scenarios, but she wants to take tough action and deter. This means that Ursula von der Leyen seems to be more oriented towards the opinions of Poland and the other Baltic states. She is definitely in favor of the red line not being crossed by the Russians. If they do, then you have to deter. That means shooting down drones and planes. Perhaps we are currently experiencing a moment in which NATO actually has to redefine its own borders, not on the map, but in their minds. Because between defense and escalation there is only one command, and the world is watching to see if that command is ever given. As always, I'm very much looking forward to your comments and opinions and wish you nevertheless a wonderful day. See you very soon. Bye.